Hello, welcome to another episode of the Seven Living with the Planets. I am Lucy Baldwin, and today is a fun episode because I'm going to be talking about how to know which planet to work with to get what you want. So, obviously, there's seven options, and how do you choose the right one? How do you know which one is going to get you the thing that you want? This is something that I get so many questions about in my courses, and it's something that I'm going to talk about today. So, I would say there are three main methods for choosing which planet to work with, and I'll tell you which one is my favorite. So, the first method is to choose a planet based on the problem or the thing that you're trying to get. So, if you're having conflict, then you could work with Mars or maybe Saturn. If you're needing money, well, money's a tricky one, but a lot of people would go for Jupiter or Venus. If you're having fear or a block, you could work with Saturn. If you are having communication problems, Mercury, illness, maybe the sun. If you're having relationship problems, Venus, right? So if you're struggling with visibility, you would say the sun. If you're trying to write a book, you might work with Mercury. If you're trying to sell a book, you might work with, well, Mercury or Jupiter. So you can see how you can definitely choose a planet based on the thing that you're trying to manifest, right? Depending on what that archetype is. Like if you're trying to make money off of your art, Venus, like that's what Venus is all about, right? Um, if you're trying to win a conflict, that is so very definitely Mars. But sometimes it's not quite so simple. And so the second method that I'm going to talk about is based on your imbalances. Like, where are you out of balance? And this is something that can be harder to identify, but this is, like I said, I would tell you, this is my favorite actually method for choosing which planet to work with. And I'm going to circle back to talking about more what I mean. The third method is using astrology. So you can do it based on the astrology that's happening currently and also based on your natal chart. So you can do it just based on your natal chart. Like if you have a chart ruler or if you have certain challenging placements in your chart, you can basically petition those planets to help you with those placements. Or if there are certain things that are happening in the astrology right now that relate to your astrology, you can do that. Or you can just do it based on how the astrology is right now. So, like, okay, the sun is moving from Pisces into Aries. And so maybe we want to think about Mars, or maybe we want to think about the moon. So you can work with it in that way. A lot of so I would definitely say, just straight out of the gate, if you have notable placements in your chart that you're worried about, because every planet has certain signs that are kind of assigned, like, yay, we like this sign, or no, we don't like this sign. And it's called the detriment, right? So you could have a sign that a planet that is in a sign that is considered bad. And I don't actually think that any of the placements are bad. There's a lot of ways that that can present. And if you watch my episode with B. Doyle, where she talks about evolutionary astrology, they don't even use that at all. They don't even say that there's such thing as like bad placements, which I agree with. But if you have a placement that you're worried about, then I would say use magic for that, because it's all about how you perceive it, really, in the end, which is a very mercurial thing to say, by the way. Um, okay, but let's talk about. So that's kind of simple. But if you're somebody who's listening to this and you don't have that, you're not like, oh my gosh, my Saturn in Pisces has been really stressing me out. So, um, which I'm not saying that Saturn I don't even wanna use examples because I don't think that any of them should stress you out, and I'm certainly not saying anything about Saturn in Pisces. We just actually moved out of Saturn in Pisces, and, my Saturn is in Capricorn, so Saturn, like, that's a really great Saturn placement, so, um but which house is it in, right? So you can get into trouble. You can find things in your astrology to be worried about. Um, I'm sure we all have them, and I would recommend not worrying about it, but if you are, then you should use magic. It's an amazing answer to the problem, right? So petition that deity to, like, figure out sort of how to navigate that better, to get their favor, to sort of ease that situation for yourself. It works really well. Okay, so number 2 though. Back to number 2. So based on imbalance in your life. So how are this requires a little bit of knowing thyself, a little bit of sort of looking at ourselves and seeing. um Self-awareness is absolutely a virtue in my book, and it's also very hard to come by sometimes. Even when we're trying really hard, it's really hard to see ourselves. But we can definitely notice certain patterns. I talk about this a lot. I have come to notice that I am a very Mars person. Um, I which is great and also can be just very intense. I just can be very intense, but I also like, conflict for me is just such a non-issue. If I have a problem with somebody, I just go right up to them and I'm like, "Hey, we need to talk about this thing," and then we resolve it like then and there. So I'm really, really, really good at conflict resolution. Um so that's a great boon for being so Marsy. But it also means that it's really hard for me to chill the F out, I've got to and so these planets actually balance each other. So if I'm really heavy Mars, I'm going to want to work with Venus, right? If I'm and so there's different ways that they relate to each other and there's different sort of ways that they can be out of balance. The whole money course, Know Thyself and Get Rich, that Layla and I created, we go through the planets in terms of how they balance. We actually, Layla and I also have a course called Calibrate, where we go through the planets and how they relate to each other. So I'm going to be touching on some of the stuff from those courses here. But if you want to dive deeper into this, I would say definitely take one or both of those courses. The money course is a much bigger course, goes through each planet. You work with one every 2 weeks, and it's on the topic of money. Um, and Calibrate is more of it's a mini course about the planets and how they balance each other out according to the same framework that we used in the money course. But the truth is that they balance each other in different ways. So, for example, the moon and Saturn have a sort of expansive, dreamy, emotional on the moon side versus structure, limitation, um, solid on the Saturn side, right? So moon is like imagination and like anything is possible. And Saturn is like limitation and not anything is possible. Only what is physically available is possible. But there's also a way that Saturn balances with Mercury. So it's like Mercury is mental and cognitive and sort of like if we're writing our own story, we're writing our own reality, we're creating reality through the stories that we tell. It's very trickstery, it's very sort of ephemeral. um, Whereas Saturn is very solid and grounded and earthy, and it's like the 4D reality. It's like, it's almost the opposite of Mercury, and that it's like, no, no, you can't just imagine anything into reality. Only what fits within the physical laws can actually exist. And of course, this is why people think that magic isn't real, because there are certain rules, like there are certain physical realities that we have to sort of abide by. And that Saturn way is very prominent, especially in the sort of structures and societal structures that we've set up around like measuring everything and quantifying everything. We've almost like we've almost made it like more dense for ourselves in doing that, where I think that um, you could argue whether these laws were actually sort of real before we discovered them. Um, I think that even just before we got so in it with the science, everything did seem a lot more magical and mythical and sort of like not so easily predictable. Like now, there's people writing entire books about how you can just use math to figure out everything, and that math is the basis for all of reality. And basically, everything can be measured and quantified and therefore predicted, and is predetermined based on this like grand mathematical equation, which which is like that's so the opposite, that's very sort of Saturnian, like it's just rigid. Whereas the mercurial side of that is like, uh-huh, yeah, sure. Like go ahead and try, as if you could possibly just like, it's dancing, Mercury is like, mm-hmm, sure, go believe that if you want. Um, and it's very playful and shape shifting and changing all the time. So that's sort of a balance, an opposition there. And then we have, of course, so I'm just talking about some of these balances that you can find. Mars Venus is a really obvious one, right? It's the masculine and the feminine. And so that's like giving versus receiving, right? The masculine is giving. It's planting the seed. It's putting the seed into the feminine, which is receiving and growing and making beautiful, and it's fertile and adorned and sort of in a, let's say, relaxed posture, whereas Mars is in a very rigid posture. It's very austere. Um, they're both very relational, right? So where Mars is conflict, Venus is love. And so if you're having a lot of conflict with people, you might want to work with Venus to bring in more love. But Venus can also be indulgent and sort of lazy and sort of inactive and um, dare I say, impotent. And so if you're feeling like you just can't get off the couch and you're just like in fantasy, then you might want Mars. But if you go too hard on Mars, you can get sort of angry, you can get into burnout. And so you want to have a balance, right? You don't want to go too far in either direction. Um, Jupiter and Mercury are also kind of on their own balance, where Jupiter is old and wise and generous and very sort of like tethered to history and like deep roots and generational wealth and making sort of strategic investments. And Mercury is more like gambling, and you might just like lose it all in one day. Or playing around. It's more like new and novel and queer and different, and um seeking sort of the cutting edge, the new, like Mercury gets bored, right? Mercury is like, I want the new shiny toy. And Jupiter is like roots and wisdom and sort of like tradition, in terms of money, Mercury is like cash flow, right? It's like money coming in, money going out. It's the flow of currency of money, whereas Jupiter is net worth. Like, what is the value of all of your assets? You have like a home, and it's like buying land and having those solid sort of, yeah, assets and worth and value and investments and things like that. Whereas Mercury is more like, how can I make cash? And maybe I'm gonna, just like go spend it tonight. Maybe I'm gonna go play a poker game. Um, and so you kind of want to have both of those too, because in order to like build wealth, because Jupiter is this like long-term wealth, right? But you need to have money coming in, you need to have cash flow. And so Mercury can also be sort of scattery, and Jupiter can be more stable, but Jupiter can also you can get into excess with Jupiter, and you can overspend, overgive, be overly generous, and get into trouble that way. You can overpromise with Jupiter. Whereas Mercury, it's a different energy. It's you might lie. Mercury might lie. Like Mercury is a shapeshifter. Mercury is just kind of like you don't even know what's true with Mercury. And sometimes I feel like our media is a really good example. It's so mercurial. It's like they're telling completely different stories, and we don't even know what's real. Like we're just being told whatever sort of made up story suits whatever narrative in order to like convince the public of whatever their agenda is. It's all so elusive. It's like, what even is truth? Mercury asks, like, what even is truth? And again, Saturn is like, truth is truth. Like, truth is very obvious what truth is to Saturn. But to Mercury, it's like, I don't even know if truth is a real thing. And then the moon is emotional, watery, sort of really like in your feelings, right? The moon is that emotional landscape. And so the moon can be sort of unstable. And so a great thing to balance that is, like I said, Saturn has a really good opposition with the moon. But Jupiter also, I would say, is a good sort of grounding, stabilizing that wisdom and tradition. It heathers you to something solid, Jupiter and Saturn. The sun is just the sun. Like, how do you balance the sun? The sun is just ever shining. So, okay, I would say, like, if you're struggling with being seen, obviously the sun is a great planet to work with. Um, what can it be like to have too much sun? I guess, like, needing to be the center of attention, needing to make everything about you, feeling a lot of, like, pressure to provide for everybody all the time. That could be sort of the sun. And so how would you balance that? I would I mean, it depends. So, I would maybe balance that with some Venus or balance it with some Jupiter, um, depending on what you're seeking. But if you want more confidence, if you feel like you lack confidence, then the sun is a really great deity to work with. And I guess, like, what I wanna kind of say in this, 'cause I'm talking about these sort of imbalances, is, like, it doesn't matter what you're trying to get. If you Any of these planets can give you any of the things. Like, you can do manifestation magic for anything with any planet. And so I genuinely believe that working with a planet based on, like, sort of what I'm talking about here, balancing yourself out, is going to, in my experience, it produces the most results. So a lot of people traditionally would say, like, don't do muddy magic with Saturn. What are you thinking? And I would say that in our money course, the first lesson is with Saturn. And I have had more positive feedback from that single lesson than I think like any other single course, just from that lesson of that course, because people who were having money problems, the Saturn lesson, they were like, this lesson alone was worth the way more than the price of this course, because Saturn, when you're lacking Saturn, that is the most powerful thing. But if you have a good Saturn, then maybe you're trying to start a business, and most people traditionally would say, like, based on number 1 here, because remember my 3 things. Number 1 is like choose which planet to work on based on what you're trying to get. And then number 2 is this, and then number 3 is based on your astrology. So if I was going by number 1 and you're like, I'm building a business, most people would say work with Jupiter. That's like the go-to for business, even though Mercury is associated with commerce, and some people might say Mercury. Um, but if you're trying to start a business and you are trying to start an online business and you have trouble being seen, which in my experience is about 80% of the people that I've worked with on this. Okay. I've been in this world for a long time. I've done a lot of programs helping people learn about marketing and magic and shadow work and all of this stuff. And so many of the people that I work with are building businesses also, obviously have taught, um, over 100 people have gone through, a coach training certification that I co-taught with Layla. And so those are all people, most of them trying to build online businesses. And I would say from what I've seen, about 80% of people, the thing that they struggle with is visibility, being seen, confidence. It's like they don't want to put themselves out there and be exposed. Like it's really hard because we're thinking about what other people are going to think about us. We think it has to be perfect. We think we need to be seen a certain way. I'm not saying this in a negative way. This is such a normal human thing. It is really hard to make yourself available for criticism. Anything that you create, anything that you put out with your name on it, people are going to judge you. You know that. And so it's scary. It's hard. It's a difficult thing to do. And so if that's your problem, then the sun is the planet to work with. Um, but so rarely do I see that. It's like, "Oh, I wanna build a business and I'm, trying to be more, put out more content, so I'm gonna work with Mercury because it's communication, or I'm gonna work with Jupiter because 'cause I'm building a business, or I'm gonna work with Venus because I wanna be liked and whatever." But then you never post. Like, so maybe if you were posting, yeah, you'd have really great ideas from Mercury, or you'd be making really great business decisions from Jupiter, or you'd be making really beautiful posts that make people love you, except you have a visibility problem, so you never post in the first place, right? Or it's like you maybe your problem is actually that you just can't show up for it regularly. So like you could, you're working with one of those 3, and when you do post, you're making beautiful posts, or when you do post, you're saying really clever things, or when you do post, you're like whatever, you're doing your Jupiter magic and it's working. Except it's not working because you're never actually posting because you don't have the discipline or you don't have the structure. So that is Saturn. That's a Saturn problem. So then it's like, well, how do you build your business? Well, normally you would work with one of the 3 that I just mentioned. But if your problem is getting yourself to show up for it regularly over time, then Saturn is the planet to work with. If it's visibility, then the sun is the planet to work with. So I hope you see what I'm getting at here. We're thinking in terms of where could I use the infusion of this energy? And this is how, or, which archetype am I lacking or could use more support from is maybe a better way of framing it, that will get me to where I'm trying to go. And so this is what I'm suggesting. And I'm just going to go through these a little bit because I'm trying to really get in the weeds here in this episode to help you understand what these different planetary archetypes can give you and sort of what they feel like to help you understand. One thing I also want to say is oftentimes the planet that you are resisting, the one that you're like, no, I don't want that. That sounds like being seen. No, I don't want to do that. I just want to like make it pretty. Um, that's the one that you should work with, right? So if all this, like, being seen stuff, you're just like, "Oh my god, no," then the sun. Like, the sun. It's the sun. Just go with the sun. Um, and the sun is a beautiful, wonderful, powerful planet to work with that I do not work with enough, so I really, really, really need to do that. Um, if you're lacking confidence, work with the sun. If you're struggling to find opportunities for yourself, then Jupiter. But, if you can't make decisions, it's Saturn. If you don't have structure, it's Saturn. If you're having a hard time like taking action, taking initiative, getting things done, it could be Mars, and discipline could also be Mars. If you are worried about burnout, Venus. If you're not having fun, Venus. If you want to be liked, if you're creating art, if it's about selling art, Venus, probably. But again, it's like, are you not selling your art because you're afraid to be seen? Are you not selling your art because you're not putting it out there? Then why aren't you putting it out there? Are you not putting it out there because it requires you to sort of like sell yourself? Because that could be different. Are you afraid of asking for things? Like, are you having money problems because you don't like asking for things? That's Venus. Asking for things is Venus. Not experiencing pleasure is Venus. Beauty is Venus. Um, and then it's like, okay, maybe you have a business, but nobody's buying. And then it's thinking about how are you asking? How are you framing the question? Maybe it's a mercurial thing. What is your messaging? I don't want to get into like a whole marketing thing here, but if you're feeling ungrounded and like you're all over the place and you can't commit to a decision, sometimes Saturn can help with that. Sometimes the moon, if you're feeling like you're on an emotional roller coaster, it's like working with the moon to find that balance or going in the opposite direction. Maybe you're too lunar, you're too like maybe you're in fantasy all the time, then going more Mars to turn that into action. So yeah, we're talking about rebalancing and not focusing like, so directly on the just the thing that we're trying to get, but what is it that has been sort of keeping us from getting it? Because we haven't had it so far. Why isn't it working? And what are we missing? And so thinking about it like that. I hope that this has helped. I honestly have had so much fun making this episode and talking about all of this, because I love these archetypes um yeah, so let me know in the reviews, comments, chat if this has helped you at all, if you've decided that you need to work on a planet maybe that you hadn't been working with. And also come and join my free online community Inner Circle because I do rituals every month with a different planet. Sometimes I don't do a planet. Like I've done one with a tarot card, I've done one around the equinox. But it's also a great way to kind of get to sample and feel the different planets and work with those energies and just sort of be held and with community. And I also do monthly community connection game calls, which are really fun and it's free. And you can connect with really awesome people. So I hope that you'll come and check that out. And in the meantime, I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.